Have you ever been told to know your place? Not in a subtle way, not through hints or passive-aggressive comments, but directly, explicitly, in front of people you thought cared about you? I have. And that moment, that single devastating moment at a family gathering, became the catalyst that changed my entire life. But before I tell you about that day, let me take you back to where it all began, to help you understand why those 4 words cut so deeply, why they shattered something inside me that I didn't even know was already cracked. Growing up, I always felt like I was on the outside looking in, even within my own family. It's a strange feeling, being surrounded by people who share your blood, your history, your last name, yet feeling like you're somehow different, like you don't quite fit into the mold they've created. I was the quiet one, the one who observed more than spoke, who felt deeply but rarely expressed those feelings outwardly. My family was loud, boisterous, filled with big personalities that took up all the oxygen in any room. My mother was the matriarch, a woman whose approval everyone sought but few received. My father was her loyal supporter, always backing her decisions, always reinforcing her views. My siblings, well, they learned early on how to play the game, how to position themselves in the hierarchy that existed in our family, though no one ever explicitly acknowledged there was one. I was the middle child, and if you know anything about birth order, you know that middle children often become the forgotten ones, the ones who slip through the cracks while the oldest gets all the responsibility and recognition, and the youngest gets all the attention and leeway. But it was more than just birth order in my family. There was something about me, about who I was fundamentally, that didn't align with their values, their expectations, their version of how life should be lived. I pursued education while they valued street smarts. I read books while they watched sports. I asked questions while they preferred simple answers. I dreamed of traveling and experiencing different cultures while they believed everything they needed was right in their hometown. These differences might seem small, might seem like normal variations in personality and preference, but in my family, they became reasons for judgment, for dismissal, for being made to feel less than. The gathering started when I was young, family events that happened with clockwork regularity. Every holiday, every birthday, every achievement or milestone, we would all come together. And I went, always. Because that's what you do, right? You show up for family. You put aside your discomfort, your feelings of not belonging, because family is supposed to be forever, supposed to be your foundation, your safe place. Except it never felt safe to me. I would arrive at these gatherings with a knot in my stomach, a tension in my shoulders that wouldn't release until I left. I would prepare myself mentally, rehearsing conversations, thinking about how to navigate the inevitable comments, the subtle jabs, the ways they would make me feel small without ever raising their voices or using obviously cruel words. They were masters at it, really, at making you feel diminished while maintaining plausible deniability, while being able to say, I was just joking, or you're too sensitive, if you dared to call them out. At these gatherings, there was always a clear structure, an unspoken but rigidly enforced hierarchy. My mother held court, literally sitting in the best seat while everyone else arranged themselves around her. My father stood nearby, her guardian and enforcer. My older brother, the golden child who had followed the prescribed path of marriage, kids, and a stable job in the family business, sat in the position of honor. My younger sister, the baby who could do no wrong, flitted around getting attention and affection. And then there was me. I would find myself in the kitchen, helping prepare food, or in the corner, entertaining the small children, or running errands that needed to be done. I told myself I preferred these roles, that I liked being helpful, that I enjoyed the quiet tasks that kept me out of the main conversations. But the truth I didn't want to acknowledge, was that these were the only places I was allowed to occupy. Whenever I tried to join the main conversation, to offer an opinion or share something from my life, I would be interrupted, talked over, or met with disinterested looks that made it clear my contribution wasn't valued. My achievements, my struggles, my experiences, they were all treated as somehow less important, less interesting, less worthy of attention than those of my siblings. When my brother got a promotion, it was celebrated with champagne and toasts. When I completed my master's degree, it was met with a brief "that's nice" before the conversation moved on to something else. When my sister had relationship drama, everyone gathered around to offer support and advice. When I went through a difficult breakup, I was told to get over it and not make everything about me. The pattern was clear, had been clear for years, but I kept showing up, kept hoping that maybe next time would be different, that maybe if I just tried harder, was more helpful, more agreeable, more accommodating, I would finally earn my place at the table, finally be seen and valued for who I was. I remember one gathering in particular, about 3 years before the incident that would change everything, where I had achieved something I was genuinely proud of. I had been published. An article I had written about social dynamics and family systems had been accepted by a respected journal, and I was excited to share this news. I waited for the right moment, for a lull in the conversation, and then I mentioned it, trying to keep my voice casual, but unable to completely hide my enthusiasm. My mother glanced at me briefly and said, "That's nice, dear," before immediately turning to my brother to ask about his son's soccer game. My father didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. My brother smirked slightly, that same smirk he'd given me throughout our childhood when he knew he was the favorite and I wasn't. My sister was on her phone, not even pretending to listen. The conversation moved on as if I hadn't spoken at all, as if my achievement was so insignificant it didn't even warrant a follow-up question or a moment of genuine attention. I felt something inside me crack a little bit more that day, felt the hope I'd been carrying start to wither. But I pushed it down, told myself I was being childish, that I needed to stop seeking validation from them, that their opinion didn't matter. Except it did matter, because these were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to celebrate my successes and comfort me in my failures, who were supposed to see me and value me simply because I existed, because I was theirs. The gatherings continued, and with each one I found myself retreating more, participating less, the light inside me dimming incrementally with each dismissal, each interruption, each moment where I was made to feel invisible. I started arriving later and leaving earlier, finding excuses about work or other commitments, anything to minimize the time I spent in that environment that made me feel so small. But I still went, still showed up, because the alternative, completely cutting ties with my family, seemed too drastic, too final, too much like giving up on the hope that things could change. I attended my nephew's birthday parties and my niece's dance recitals. I showed up for holiday dinners and family barbecues. I sent cards and gifts for every occasion. I called my parents regularly. I did everything that a good daughter and sister was supposed to do, all while feeling increasingly disconnected, increasingly aware that I was performing a role rather than participating in genuine relationships. And then there were the comments, the seemingly innocent statements that carried so much weight, so much judgment. Why aren't you married yet? When are you going to settle down? Don't you think it's time to stop chasing dreams and be realistic? Your sister managed to balance everything. Why can't you? Your brother knew what was important in life. Why don't you? These questions, these comparisons, they were constant, a background noise that reinforced the message that who I was, what I wanted, how I chose to live my life, was somehow wrong, somehow less than, somehow not enough. I tried to explain myself, tried to help them understand that my path was different but not wrong, that success and fulfillment could look different for different people, that I was happy with my choices even if they weren't the choices they would have made. But my explanations were met with dismissive shrugs or condescending smiles, the kind that said they thought I was deluding myself, that eventually I would realize they were right and I was wrong, that I would come crawling back, conforming to their expectations. The emotional toll of these gatherings became increasingly heavy. I would spend days beforehand feeling anxious, days afterward feeling depleted and questioning myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining the dynamics that seemed so clear to me? Was I the problem, as they sometimes suggested, too different, too difficult, too unwilling to just go with the flow and accept things as they were? I saw a therapist during this time, someone I could talk to honestly about what I was experiencing, and she helped me understand that what I was feeling was valid, that the dynamics in my family were indeed problematic, that I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive for being hurt by treatment that was objectively dismissive and disrespectful. She used terms like scapegoat and black sheep and emotional invalidation, and suddenly I had language for what I'd been experiencing my entire life. But having language for it didn't make it easier to navigate, didn't protect me from the pain of being treated as less than by the people who were supposed to love me most. The incident that became the turning point happened on a warm summer evening at my parents' house, a gathering to celebrate my father's birthday. I had driven 3 hours to be there, had brought a thoughtful gift, had prepared myself mentally for the usual dynamics. The house was full of extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins. The noise level was deafening, and everyone seemed happy, relaxed, enjoying themselves. I tried to be present, tried to engage, tried to find my place in the chaos. Dinner was served, an elaborate spread that my mother had spent days preparing, and we all gathered around the large dining table, the overflow of guests filling into the living room with plates balanced on their laps. I found myself, as usual, somewhere in the periphery, not quite at the main table, but close enough to hear the conversations. My uncle, my father's brother, started telling a story about his recent promotion at work, and everyone was listening attentively, asking questions, offering congratulations. When he finished, there was a natural pause, and I saw an opening, a moment where I could share something about my own professional life. I had recently been offered a position leading a project I cared deeply about, something that utilized my skills and aligned with my values, and I was excited about it. So I spoke up, my voice perhaps a bit louder than usual to be heard over the ambient noise, and I began to explain about this new opportunity. I got maybe 2 sentences in before my mother interrupted me, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the room. "Nobody wants to hear about that right now," she said, and there was a moment of silence, of tension, where everyone's attention shifted to this exchange. I felt my face flush, felt humiliation wash over me, but I tried to laugh it off, tried to make it seem like it didn't bother me. "I just thought since Uncle Jim was sharing about his work, I could share about mine," I said, keeping my voice light, reasonable. That's when my mother said it, when she spoke the words that would echo in my mind for months afterward, the words that would become the catalyst for everything that followed. She looked directly at me, her expression stern, almost disgusted, and she said, "You need to know your place at these gatherings. This isn't about you." The room went completely silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could sense the discomfort radiating from the other guests who had witnessed this public humiliation. My father said nothing, just looked down at his plate. My brother actually chuckled quietly, as if he found it amusing. My sister looked sympathetic for a brief moment before looking away, unwilling to come to my defense. None of the extended family members spoke up, though some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And I just sat there, frozen, my mouth slightly open, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. Know your place. Those 3 words contained multitudes. They were a statement about hierarchy, about my position at the bottom of it. They were a dismissal of my worth, my right to participate, my equality as a member of this family. They were a public declaration that I was less than, that I didn't deserve the same respect, the same attention, the same consideration as everyone else. They were, in that moment, the crystallization of everything I had felt my entire life, every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being made to feel invisible, all wrapped up in one devastating phrase. I don't remember much about the rest of that evening. I know I stayed for a little while longer, went through the motions of normalcy, helped clear dishes, made small talk with a cousin about something meaningless, but inside, something had fundamentally shifted. The crack that had been growing inside me for years suddenly became a chasm, a split so deep and wide that I knew there was no going back, no returning to the way things had been. When I finally left that night, walking to my car alone while the party continued inside, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking with the force of emotions I had suppressed for so long. Anger, hurt, betrayal, grief. They all flooded through me in waves. But underneath all of that, there was something else, something that surprised me. There was a sense of clarity, of a decision being made, of a path forward finally becoming visible after years of being obscured. I realized, sitting in that car, that I had been waiting my entire life for them to see me, to value me, to give me permission to take up space and be myself. And I suddenly understood, with a certainty that was both liberating and terrifying, that they never would. They had decided long ago who I was allowed to be in relation to them, and nothing I did, no achievement I accomplished, no way I tried to accommodate or please them, would ever change that. I had been playing a rigged game, trying to win approval that was never going to be given, seeking acceptance from people who had already decided I was unacceptable. And in that moment of devastating clarity, I made a choice. I chose to stop playing. The days following that gathering were some of the darkest I've experienced, not because of what had happened, but because of what I was contemplating, the enormity of the decision I was considering. I had always believed that family was forever, that blood ties were unbreakable, that you worked through problems no matter how difficult they were. The idea of walking away, of creating distance, of choosing to remove myself from the family system that had defined my entire life, it felt monumental, almost impossible. But I couldn't unsee what I had seen, couldn't unhear those words, couldn't unfeel the pain and humiliation of that moment. And more than that, I couldn't continue pretending that things were okay, that the way I was being treated was acceptable. that I deserved to be spoken to and treated in that manner. I called in sick to work for a few days, something I rarely did, and I spent that time really examining my relationship with my family, looking at it honestly without the filters of obligation and hope that had colored my perception for so long. I went back through memories, through years of interactions, and I started to see patterns I had been ignoring or minimizing. I remembered the time in high school when I had made the honor roll, and my mother had focused instead on how my brother had made the football team, as if academic achievement was less valuable than athletic achievement. I remembered the time in college when I had called home excited about a research opportunity I'd been offered, and my father had cut me off mid-sentence to tell me about my sister's new boyfriend. I remembered countless holidays where my opinions were dismissed, my feelings were invalidated, my presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. I remembered the time I had shared that I was struggling with depression and was told to snap out of it and stop being so dramatic. I remembered the time I had tried to set a boundary about how I wanted to be spoken to and was accused of being difficult and creating problems. The pattern was undeniable, had been there all along, and I had been complicit in it by continuing to show up, continuing to accept treatment that diminished me, continuing to hope that if I just tried harder or was more understanding, things would change. But they hadn't changed, and I finally understood they never would. Because the problem wasn't me. It was the system, the family dynamics that required someone to be at the bottom, someone to be the scapegoat, someone to be less than so that others could feel more than. And I had been assigned that role long ago, maybe from birth, maybe because of my personality, maybe for reasons I would never fully understand. But regardless of why it had happened, I now had to decide what to do about it. I had to decide whether I would continue accepting that role, continue participating in a system that hurt me, or whether I would choose something different, something that felt terrifying but also necessary for my own well-being and survival. I reached out to my therapist, had an emergency session where I poured out everything that had happened, everything I was feeling, everything I was considering. She listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and then she said something that struck me deeply. She said, "Choosing to distance yourself from family members who consistently treat you poorly isn't giving up on family. It's refusing to give up on yourself." Those words gave me permission I apparently needed to prioritize my own mental and emotional health, to recognize that I deserved to be treated with respect and kindness, and that if my family of origin couldn't or wouldn't provide that, I had every right to seek it elsewhere. I spent time researching and reading about family estrangement, about toxic family dynamics, about how to set boundaries with people who don't respect them. I learned that what I was experiencing was more common than I realized, that many people struggle with family systems that are unhealthy, that choosing to step away wasn't a sign of weakness or failure, but rather an act of self-preservation and self-respect. I learned about the concept of chosen family, about building relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than obligation and blood ties. And slowly, over those few days of intense reflection and emotional processing, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. I began to feel hopeful. Not hopeful that my family would change, I had released that hope, but hopeful that I could create a different life for myself. One where I was valued and respected. One where I didn't have to constantly brace myself for criticism and dismissal. One where I could simply be myself without apology or fear. Making the actual decision to distance myself from my family was both easier and harder than I expected. It was easier because once I acknowledged the truth of the situation, once I stopped making excuses for their behavior or blaming myself for not being able to make the relationship work, the path forward became clear. It was harder because it meant grieving. Grieving for the family I had always wanted but never had. Grieving for the relationships that could have been but never were. Grieving for the years I had spent trying to earn love and acceptance that should have been freely given. I didn't make some grand announcement, didn't send a dramatic letter or have a confrontational conversation. Instead, I simply started pulling back, gradually and intentionally. When my mother called asking why I hadn't responded to her message about the next family gathering, I told her I had other plans. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't apologize excessively as I would have in the past. When my sister texted asking me to help her with something that in the past I would have dropped everything to assist with, I said I wasn't available. When my brother sent a sarcastic message mocking something I had posted on social media, I didn't respond at all, just blocked him. Each of these small acts of boundary setting felt revolutionary, felt like I was reclaiming power I had given away long ago. And with each one, I felt lighter, felt the weight of their expectations and judgment beginning to lift from my shoulders. Of course, they noticed. My mother was the first to really push back, calling me and demanding to know what was wrong, why I was being distant, why I was causing problems. I remember that conversation so clearly, standing in my apartment, looking out the window at the city below, feeling my resolve being tested. She used all the usual tactics, guilt-tripping me about how much she did for me, accusing me of being ungrateful, reminding me that family is supposed to stick together no matter what. She brought up the past, selective memories of times she claimed she had supported me, conveniently forgetting all the times she had dismissed or belittled me. She played the victim, saying I was hurting her by pulling away, making it about her feelings rather than addressing the reasons why I was creating distance. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost fell back into the old pattern, almost started apologizing and explaining and trying to make her understand. But then I remembered that moment at the dinner table, those words, "Know your place," and the feeling of humiliation that had washed over me, and I found my strength. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I needed space, that the way I was being treated at family gatherings was not acceptable to me, and that I was choosing to prioritize my own well-being. Her response was immediate and harsh. She told me I was being selfish, that I was overreacting, that I was making something out of nothing. She said I had always been too sensitive, too dramatic, that I needed to grow up and stop holding grudges. She even tried to gaslight me about what had happened at the dinner, suggesting that I had misinterpreted her words, that she hadn't meant them the way I took them, that I was remembering wrong. But I stood firm. I didn't argue, didn't try to convince her, didn't seek her validation or understanding. I simply repeated that I was taking space and that I needed her to respect that, and then I ended the call. My hands were shaking when I hung up, adrenaline coursing through my body, but underneath the fear and anxiety, there was pride. I had stood up for myself. I had set a boundary and held it, even in the face of manipulation and guilt-tripping. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. Have you ever had to choose between your own well-being and keeping the peace with family? It's one of the hardest decisions you can face. Comment below if you've been through something similar. The aftermath of my decision to create distance was complicated and painful in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. My mother, after that initial phone call, launched what I can only describe as a campaign to bring me back into line, to make me return to my designated role in the family system. She enlisted my father, who called leaving awkward voicemails about how I was breaking my mother's heart, how family should come first, how I was being difficult. She got my siblings involved, and suddenly I was receiving messages from both of them, my brothers characteristically mocking and dismissive, saying I was being childish and attention-seeking, my sisters more manipulative, playing on my emotions and reminding me of good times we'd had together as if those moments somehow canceled out years of dismissive treatment. She even reached out to extended family members, telling her version of events, painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful, problematic daughter. I started getting calls and messages from aunts and uncles, cousins I barely spoke to, all of them essentially telling me I needed to reconcile with my mother, that I was in the wrong, that family disagreements shouldn't lead to this kind of estrangement. What was fascinating and infuriating in equal measure was that none of them asked for my side of the story. None of them seemed interested in understanding why I had made this choice. They had already decided, based on my mother's narrative, that I was the problem, that I was being unreasonable, that I needed to apologize and make things right. It was a masterclass in manipulation, really, in how someone can control a narrative and turn people against you without those people ever questioning whether they're getting the full story. I felt isolated during this time, felt like I was standing alone against an entire system that wanted me to fall back in line. The guilt was crushing some days, the voice in my head that had been programmed over decades telling me I was being selfish, that I was wrong, that I should just apologize and go back to how things were. But I had started therapy more regularly, going twice a week during this period, and my therapist helped me stay grounded in my truth, helped me remember why I had made this choice, helped me develop strategies for dealing with the guilt and the manipulation. She introduced me to terms like flying monkeys, the people who are sent to do the bidding of a narcissistic or manipulative person, and DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender, a common tactic used by abusive people when confronted. Understanding these patterns helped me see that what was happening wasn't unique to my family, that it was actually a predictable response from a dysfunctional system that was losing control of one of its members. One particularly difficult moment came about 2 months into my boundary setting when my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock on the door, looked through the peephole, and felt my stomach drop when I saw her standing there. I had a choice to make in that moment, to open the door and engage or to maintain my boundary. Every part of my conditioning told me to open it, that it would be rude not to, that you don't ignore your mother when she's standing at your door. But I also knew that if I opened that door, I would be signaling that my boundaries were flexible, that if she just pushed hard enough, she could override them. So I didn't open it. I stood there, on the other side of the door, listening to her knock repeatedly, hearing her call my name, hearing the knocking become more aggressive, hearing her frustration mounting. After about 10 minutes, she left, but not before leaving a note that I found later. A note filled with guilt trips and accusations, a note that told me I was breaking her heart, that she didn't understand what she had done to deserve this treatment, that I needed to stop being so difficult and talk to her. Reading that note, I felt such a mix of emotions. Sadness that she still didn't understand, still couldn't or wouldn't take any responsibility for the dynamics that had led to this point. Anger that she was making herself the victim in a situation where I was the one who had been consistently hurt and dismissed. But also, surprisingly, a growing sense of strength, because I had held my boundary. I hadn't opened that door. I hadn't let her manipulate me into a conversation I wasn't ready for. That was progress. Real progress. Even though it didn't feel like progress in the moment. The hardest part of creating distance from my family wasn't the guilt or the manipulation attempts, though those were certainly difficult. The hardest part was the grief, the deep, profound mourning for relationships that I was accepting would never be what I wanted them to be. I grieved for the mother I had always hoped would see me, really see me, and celebrate who I was. I grieved for the siblings I had wanted to be close to share life with, to have as genuine friends and supporters. I grieved for the family gatherings I had hoped would someday feel warm and inclusive, rather than tense and hierarchical. I grieved for the unconditional love and acceptance that I realized I had been seeking, but had never received. This grief would hit me at unexpected moments. I'd be going about my day, feeling okay, feeling like I was handling everything well, and then I'd see a commercial showing a happy family laughing together, or I'd overhear someone talking about their wonderful relationship with their mother, or a holiday would approach and I'd remember that I wouldn't be attending any family celebrations, and suddenly I'd be overwhelmed with sadness. There were days when I questioned my decision, days when the loneliness felt unbearable, days when I wondered if I was making a huge mistake, if I was throwing away relationships that, despite their flaws, were still family. But then I would remember that feeling, that moment of public humiliation at the dinner table, and I would remember all the moments that had led up to it, all the years of feeling small and invisible and less than, and I would know that I had made the right choice. I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't continue participating in a dynamic that was slowly destroying my sense of self-worth. During this period, I leaned heavily on my friends, on people I had known for years but had perhaps taken for granted, not fully appreciating how much they valued me. I started being more vulnerable with them, sharing what I was going through, expecting perhaps that they would judge me or tell me I was wrong to distance myself from family. But their response surprised me. They were supportive, validating, understanding. Many of them shared their own stories of difficult family dynamics, of boundaries they'd had to set, of relationships they'd had to end or limit for their own well-being. I realized that I wasn't alone in this, that many people struggle with family relationships that are toxic or unhealthy, and that there's a whole community of people who understand what it's like to have to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. One friend in particular, Sarah, became a lifeline during this time. She had gone through something similar with her own family years earlier, and had come out the other side stronger and happier. She told me something that I've carried with me ever since. She said, "The family you're born into is random chance. The family you build for yourself, the people you choose to surround yourself with, that's intentional. And sometimes the chosen family is the one that really counts." This concept of chosen family was revolutionary to me. I had always thought of family in the traditional sense, as something defined by blood and obligation. But I started to see it differently. Started to see that family could be about love and respect and mutual support, about people who show up for you and celebrate your successes and comfort you in your failures, about relationships that are reciprocal rather than one-sided. I began intentionally cultivating these kinds of relationships, deepening friendships that had previously been more surface level, being more open and authentic with people, allowing myself to be vulnerable and ask for support when I needed it. And something amazing happened. People responded. They opened up in return, shared their own struggles and vulnerabilities, showed up for me in ways my family of origin never had. I started to build a support system that felt genuine and nourishing, that lifted me up rather than tearing me down. I celebrated my birthday that year with friends, a small gathering at my apartment, and it was one of the most meaningful birthdays I'd ever had. No one made snide comments about my life choices. No one interrupted me when I spoke. No one made me feel like I had to earn my place in the room. I was simply celebrated for existing, for being me, and that experience was so powerful, so different from what I had experienced at family gatherings, that I actually cried happy tears at one point during the evening. About 6 months into my journey of distance and self-discovery, something unexpected happened. My sister reached out, not with the usual guilt-tripping messages or attempts to bring me back into the family fold, but with what seemed like genuine curiosity and concern. Her message was simple. Can we talk? Just you and me. No one else involved. I was suspicious at first, wondering if this was another tactic, another attempt to manipulate me back into the family system. But something in her tone felt different, felt sincere, so I agreed to meet her for coffee, neutral territory where I could leave if I needed to. When we met, she surprised me. She told me she had been thinking a lot about the family dynamics, about the way things had always been, and that my stepping back had forced her to look at things she had been avoiding. She admitted that she had witnessed me being treated differently, being dismissed and belittled, and that she had said nothing, had sometimes even participated in it because it was easier to go along with the family dynamic than to rock the boat. She apologized, tears in her eyes, saying she was sorry for not standing up for me, for not being the sister I deserved. It was the validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed, having someone from inside the family acknowledge that what I had experienced was real, that I hadn't been imagining or exaggerating the way I was treated. We talked for hours that day, and she shared her own struggles with the family dynamics, how she had played a different role, the golden child, the baby, but how that role had its own cage, its own limitations. She told me about the pressure she felt to maintain that position, to always be cheerful and agreeable, to never show negative emotions or have problems, because that's what was expected of her. We realized that the family system had trapped all of us in different ways, assigning us roles that served the system but not our individual growth and authenticity. I asked her why she was reaching out now, why she had this change of heart, and she was honest. She said that watching me have the courage to step away had inspired her to look at her own relationship with the family more critically. She had recently tried to set a small boundary with our mother, asking for some space around a particular issue, and had been met with such hostility and manipulation that it had opened her eyes to the patterns I had been trying to tell her about for years. She finally understood, not intellectually, but experientially, what I had been dealing with my entire life. Our conversation that day was healing in ways I hadn't expected. We cried together, laughed together, shared memories and perspectives that helped both of us process our experiences. She asked if I would consider having a relationship with her separate from the rest of the family, if we could build something between just the two of us that wasn't defined by family dynamics and expectations. I was cautious but willing to try. We agreed to take things slowly, to build trust gradually, to not rush into anything. Over the following months, we did exactly that. We met regularly, just the two of us, and we built a relationship that was healthier and more authentic than anything we'd had before. She respected my boundaries around not attending family gatherings, didn't pressure me to reconcile with our parents or brother, didn't report back to them about our conversations. She became, for the first time in my life, a real sister, a friend, someone I could trust and rely on. This relationship showed me that it was possible to have selective relationships with family members, that I didn't have to maintain an all-or-nothing approach. I could have a relationship with her while still maintaining distance from others who had shown no willingness to acknowledge the harm they'd caused or change their behavior. Does this resonate with you? Have you ever had to navigate different relationships within your family? Let me know in the comments. My parents, meanwhile, continued their attempts to bring me back into the fold, but their tactics evolved over time. After the direct confrontation didn't work, after the flying monkeys didn't work, they tried a different approach. They started sending gifts, cards for every occasion, messages saying they loved me and missed me. On the surface, these gestures seemed kind, seemed like olive branches, but I had learned to look beneath the surface, to understand the motivations behind actions. These weren't genuine attempts at reconciliation or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. They were attempts to maintain control, to keep me engaged in the system, to make me feel guilty for maintaining my boundaries. The gifts came with strings attached, with expectations that I would respond, that I would feel obligated to reconnect. The messages of love and missing me rang hollow when they contained no acknowledgement of what had happened, No apology for the treatment that had led to my distance. No indication that anything would be different if I returned. I recognized these tactics for what they were. Hoovering, a term I had learned in my research about toxic family dynamics, named after the vacuum cleaner brand because it's about sucking someone back into a dysfunctional system. Understanding this pattern helped me not fall for it, helped me maintain my boundaries even when guilt tried to pull me back. I responded minimally to these overtures. A brief thank you for a gift, but no engagement beyond that. No opening for further manipulation. And gradually, over time, the attempts became less frequent. My mother, I learned through my sister, had moved on to a new narrative, telling people that I had cut her off for no reason, that she had no idea what she'd done wrong, that she was the victim of a difficult, ungrateful daughter. This narrative hurt, knowing that people believed her version of events, knowing that I was being vilified in family circles. But I also realized that anyone who knew me, who really knew me, would question that narrative, would reach out to get my side of the story. And anyone who didn't, anyone who simply accepted her version without question, well, those weren't relationships worth maintaining anyway. I was learning to let go, not just of my toxic family relationships, but also of the need for everyone to understand or approve of my choices. I was learning that I didn't need to justify my boundaries, didn't need to convince people of my truth, didn't need validation from those who were determined not to see my perspective. This was incredibly freeing, releasing myself from the burden of other people's opinions and judgments. I focused instead on building the life I wanted, on pursuing my goals and dreams without the constant background noise of family criticism and dismissal. I took the promotion for the project I was excited about. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see. I tried new hobbies and met new people. I wrote more, published more, pursued creative projects that fed my soul. I invested in therapy and personal growth, working through the trauma and conditioning of my childhood, learning healthy relationship patterns, developing a stronger sense of self. And I was happier, genuinely happier than I had been in years, maybe ever. There was still sadness, still grief, still moments when I wished things could have been different. Holidays were particularly difficult, knowing that I was spending them without family, creating new traditions that felt somewhat hollow in their newness. But even in those difficult moments, I never regretted my decision to create distance. Because the alternative, going back to a situation where I was constantly diminished and dismissed, where I had to shrink myself to fit into a space that was never designed to accommodate me, that was worse than any loneliness or sadness I experienced in my new life. About a year into my boundary-setting journey, something happened that really tested my resolve and showed me how much I had grown. My father had a health scare, nothing life-threatening but serious enough that he was hospitalized for a few days. My sister called to tell me, and I could hear in her voice the expectation, the hope maybe, that this would be the thing that brought me back, that would override my boundaries. And I'll be honest, I was tempted. The conditioning of a lifetime, the belief that family shows up for each other no matter what, that pulled at me strongly. I imagined showing up at the hospital, being welcomed back with open arms, everyone so grateful I was there that all the past issues would be forgotten. It was a seductive fantasy. But I also knew it was just that, a fantasy. Showing up at the hospital wouldn't change the fundamental dynamics that had led to my distance. It wouldn't mean my feelings and experiences would suddenly be validated. It would just mean I was back in the system, subject to the same patterns, the same treatment. So I made a choice that felt right for me, one that honored both my concern for my father's health and my need for boundaries. I sent flowers to the hospital with a card wishing him well. I checked in with my sister for updates on his condition, but I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't allow this crisis to be used as leverage to pull me back into dynamics that were harmful to me. My mother predictably used this as further evidence of my terrible character, telling people that I didn't even care enough about my father to visit him in the hospital. But I knew the truth. I cared deeply about my father, but I also cared about myself, and I had learned that I could hold both of those things at once. I could wish him well and want him to recover while also maintaining boundaries that protected my mental and emotional health. This situation also highlighted something important about my father's role in all of this. He had been largely silent throughout my childhood and adult life, as I was dismissed and belittled. He had stood by and allowed the family dynamics to play out, never intervening, never defending me, never acknowledging that there was a problem. In some ways, his silent complicity was as hurtful as my mother's active dismissal. He had had countless opportunities to stand up for me, to validate my experiences, to help create a healthier family dynamic, and he had chosen instead to maintain the status quo, to support my mother's treatment of me, to pretend nothing was wrong. So while I had concern for his health, I also had to acknowledge that our relationship wasn't one where I owed him unlimited access to me, where I needed to sacrifice my well-being out of obligation. That realization that I didn't owe anyone access to me, not even my parents, was profound. I had spent my whole life believing that family was different, that blood ties created obligations that overrode everything else, including my own needs and boundaries. But I was learning that healthy relationships, even family relationships, are built on mutual respect and care, not on obligation and guilt. And where that mutual respect and care don't exist, where one person is consistently harmed in the relationship, it's not just acceptable but necessary to create distance. My father recovered fully from his health scare, and life went on. My absence from the hospital was added to the list of grievances my mother held against me, but it didn't change my resolve. If anything, it strengthened it, because I had faced a major test of my boundaries and I had held firm. I had proven to myself that I could maintain my limits even in difficult circumstances, even when the pull to revert to old patterns was strong. The transformation that happened over the next year of my life was profound. With the energy and emotional bandwidth I had been spending on managing toxic family relationships, on preparing for gatherings and recovering from them, on dealing with the constant stream of criticism and dismissal, I was able to invest in myself and my life in ways I never had before. I threw myself into my work and discovered a passion and competence I hadn't fully accessed before, unencumbered by the voice in my head telling me I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of success. I received recognition for my contributions, was offered leadership opportunities, mentored younger colleagues, and found genuine satisfaction in my professional life. In my personal life, I started dating again. Something I had largely avoided because I had internalized so many negative messages about my worth and lovability. But with therapy and distance from the family dynamics, I had started to see myself differently, to recognize my value, to believe that I deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. The relationships I formed were different from past relationships, healthier, more balanced. I was attracted to different types of people, drawn to those who were secure and emotionally available, rather than those who recreated the familiar dynamics of my family where I had to earn love and acceptance. I learned to recognize red flags early, to set boundaries in romantic relationships just as I had learned to set them with family, to walk away from situations that didn't serve me rather than trying to fix or endure them. I met someone, eventually, who treated me in a way I had never experienced before. He listened when I spoke, asked follow-up questions because he was genuinely interested in what I had to say. He celebrated my achievements without qualification or comparison. He supported my boundaries and never asked me to compromise them. He met my chosen family, my friends who had become like siblings to me, and he integrated into that circle naturally, adding to it rather than trying to replace it. When I told him about my family situation, he didn't judge me or tell me I should try to reconcile. He simply said, "That must have been incredibly painful, and I'm sorry you went through it. You deserve so much better." That simple validation, that acknowledgement of my pain and my worth, it meant everything. I also deepened my relationship with myself during this time, something that might sound cliché but was actually revolutionary for me. I had spent so much of my life looking outward for validation, for approval, for someone to tell me I was okay just as I was. But I started to develop that voice internally, to become my own source of validation and acceptance. I started treating myself with the kindness and patience I would offer a dear friend. I stopped berating myself for not being enough, for not fitting into molds that were never right for me. I celebrated my quirks and differences, the very things that had made me feel like I didn't belong in my family. I started to see them not as flaws, but as features, as the things that made me uniquely me. I took up painting, something I had always wanted to try but had never had the confidence to pursue. I wasn't particularly good at it, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was doing something purely for my own enjoyment, not to achieve or impress or prove anything, just to experience the joy of creating. I traveled solo for the first time, took a trip to a place I had always wanted to see, and discovered that I was excellent company for myself, that I didn't need to have someone with me to validate the experience or make it worthwhile. I sat in cafes in foreign cities and wrote in my journal. I explored museums and historical sites at my own pace. I talked to strangers and made temporary connections, and I felt more alive and present than I ever had at a family gathering. The confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating finally came about 18 months after I had begun creating distance from my family. My mother, after all her other tactics had failed, decided she needed to speak with me in person, to have it out, as she put it. She contacted me through my sister, asking if I would agree to meet with her, And after much deliberation and consultation with my therapist, I decided I would. Not because I hoped for reconciliation or because I thought it would change anything, but because I had things I needed to say, truths I needed to speak, and I had finally reached a point where I could do so without needing her to hear them or accept them. I just needed to say them for myself. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in a town between where we both lived. I arrived early, positioned myself at a table near the exit where I would see her come in, where I could leave quickly if I needed to. When she walked in, I was struck by how nervous I felt, how my body still responded to her presence with tension and anxiety, even after all this time and all this work. She looked older, more tired, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy before reminding myself that I could feel compassion for her without accepting mistreatment from her. We made uncomfortable small talk for a few minutes before she got to the point. She wanted to know what she had done that was so terrible that I felt the need to cut her out of my life. There was an edge to her voice, a defensiveness that signaled she wasn't actually open to hearing my answer, but I had committed to this conversation, so I responded honestly. I told her about the dinner, about her telling me to know my place, about how that moment had crystallized years of feeling dismissed and invisible in the family. I told her about all the times my achievements had been minimized, my struggles invalidated, my presence tolerated rather than celebrated. I told her about the hierarchy that existed in the family, about how I had always been at the bottom of it, and how exhausting and demoralizing it had been to constantly try to earn a place that should have been mine by birthright. I spoke calmly, factually, without anger or accusation, just stating my experience and my truth. Her response was everything I expected and nothing I hoped for. She denied it all, said I was remembering things wrong, that I had always been too sensitive, that I was making mountains out of molehills. She cried, said I was breaking her heart, that she had always loved me and done her best. She turned it back on me, said I had been difficult since childhood, that I had always been the one to create problems in the family, that everyone else got along fine, so clearly the issue was with me, not with them. She refused to take any responsibility, to acknowledge any of the hurt she had caused, to show any willingness to change or make amends. And in that moment, watching her perform what I recognize now as a classic example of Darvo, denying my reality, attacking my character, and making herself the victim, I felt something shift inside me. The last little piece of hope I had been carrying, the hope that maybe she would surprise me, that maybe she would finally see me and hear me and acknowledge what had happened, that died. And with its death came a strange sense of peace. Because now I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made the right choice in creating distance. This woman sitting across from me, she was never going to give me what I needed. She was never going to be the mother I had hoped for. And that wasn't my fault. Wasn't because I was too difficult or too sensitive or too anything. It was because she was incapable of the self-reflection and accountability that would be required to build a healthy relationship. I finished my coffee, told her that I appreciated her meeting with me, but that my boundaries were going to remain in place, and I wished her well. She sputtered, tried to continue the argument, tried to make me stay and hash it out more, but I simply stood up, said goodbye, and walked out of the coffee shop. I sat in my car for a few minutes afterward, processing what had just happened, how I felt about it. I wasn't angry, wasn't sad, wasn't anything really except clear. Clear about who she was, clear about what I could expect from her, clear about my decision to maintain distance. It was the closure I needed. Not because she had given me anything, but because I had given myself permission to stop seeking what she couldn't provide. I drove home and called my therapist, had an impromptu phone session where I processed the encounter. She told me she was proud of me, that I had handled it with grace and strength, that I had honored my truth while also setting and maintaining boundaries. That validation from someone whose opinion I respected, it meant more to me than any validation I could have gotten from my mother. In the weeks and months that followed that meeting, I found myself thinking less and less about my family of origin. They no longer occupied the central space in my mind and heart that they once had. The wounds were healing, slowly but steadily. I still had moments of grief, still had days when I wished things could have been different, but those moments became less frequent, less intense. And in the space where pain and longing had been, other things started to grow. Joy, peace, confidence, self-love, authentic connections with people who truly valued me. I celebrated 2 years of maintaining my boundaries, 2 years of choosing myself, 2 years of building a life that felt authentic and nourishing. I threw a party, invited my chosen family, the friends who had become my true family, and I gave a little speech, thanking them for being the people who saw me, who valued me, who celebrated me just as I was. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine. Someone asked me if I ever regretted my decision to distance myself from my family, and I answered honestly. I said no, I didn't regret it, that it was one of the hardest but best decisions I'd ever made, that it had allowed me to become the person I was meant to be, unencumbered by roles and expectations that had never fit. I said that I had lost my family of origin but gained something more valuable, a family of choice, people who loved me not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection and respect. I looked around at the faces in that room, people who had shown up for me in countless ways, who had supported me through my journey, who had celebrated my growth and healing, and I felt overwhelmingly grateful. This was my place, not at the bottom of some hierarchy, not in the corner or the kitchen or anywhere I was told to be, but right here, in the center of a circle of people who loved me, surrounded by warmth and acceptance and belonging. This was the new place I had found, away from them, and it was so much better than anything I had left behind. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening, for bearing witness to my journey. I hope that if you're struggling with similar situations, if you're in a family dynamic that makes you feel small or invisible or less than, you'll know that you're not alone, that your feelings are valid, that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I hope you'll find the courage, when you're ready, to set the boundaries you need, to prioritize your well-being, to create the life and relationships you deserve. And I hope you'll understand that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, it's an act of self-love and self-preservation. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to know they're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart or made you think differently about family dynamics, please leave a like. It helps this video reach more people who might need to hear this message. Make sure you're subscribed to Living Through It because I share more stories like this, real stories about real struggles and how we survive and thrive through them. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Remember, you are worthy of love and respect. You deserve relationships that lift you up rather than tear you down, and you have every right to choose yourself, to find your place in this world, even if it means stepping away from the place others told you to occupy. Thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and remember, we're all just living through it together.